or potential failure of infrastructure, so maybe it's appropriate. We have a really wonderful panel, and I want to thank a couple of people before we get started. Judith Hermanson, Senior Vice President at CHF, has been a great partner in this and in other endeavors, and I'd like to thank her and Jeff Muir for their help, and Allison Garland and Lauren Hertzer, the Wilson Center staff who run the Comparative Urban Studies program with me. I want to thank them. And I will mention, Chris Williams is going to mention a report coming out of the Nanjing Forum, a draft report. We had hoped to have Xerox copies available for you, but bad weather affects the copying equipment at the Wilson Center for some strange reason. So we will put it on our website, and if you would like us to email it to you, get in touch with Allison or with Lauren either before you leave or send us an email and we'll send you the report. That anticipates the panel, and this is really an exciting moment for all of us who have been concerned about the future of cities around the world, coming off of a very successful World Urban Forum in Nanjing last October and already anticipating the fifth forum in Rio in 2010. And we wanted to highlight what happened in Nanjing, but do so within the context of looking forward, and we're very pleased to have this panel. I'm not going to introduce them individually because there's biographical information available outside. If you haven't gotten it, please do so, because I'm just going to turn over to the panel after basically identifying people. Gerald Anderson is Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of International Organizations Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Judith Hermanson, I've already mentioned, is Senior Vice President, CHF International. Jessica Toludo is Acting Team Director of the Urban Programs and Engineering Services team at USAID and an old partner and friend of ours. And Chris Williams is representative of UN Habitat in the Washington, D.C. office. And that will be the order in which they will speak. The plan is to have each speaker make his or her presentation, and then we'll open up for Q&A. But I know that Gerald has to leave about 10:30, so if we find we're sliding behind, I may interrupt for questions for you. But why don't we try to keep the original plan? Mm-hmm. And with that, Gerald, the floor is yours.
Blair, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here at this meeting, and I also want to thank Judith and the team at CHF for including me. And I think the fact that I'm here is kind of a thumbnail example of the kind of networking that occurs at the World Urban Forum. We happened to meet by chance at and we were searching this morning for the word to describe the venue where we met. It was somewhere between an airplane hangar and a high school cafeteria, and it was on the scale of everything in China, vast. And the fact that we happened to meet inside that vast space, maybe it was fate, but it was an example of how bringing a lot of people together who are unified by their interest in the fate of cities and the problems that the majority of the world's population who now live in cities are aware of, bring to that kind of forum. And it offered an excellent opportunity for a lot of exchanges of ideas that wouldn't normally happen in the daily routines of any of the participants in the forum. And I have to say, before I actually participated in this event, when just looking at the schedule and the list of participants and the amount of time, and comparing that to my experience as an American diplomat in the UN system and multilateral organizations, I had to say I was very puzzled as to how this kind of an event could produce any result, because it's very unique in the UN system, which is typically characterized by meetings where governments get together, they have a text that they're working on, they have a bunch of meetings for a period of time, and then a text emerges. And that text may or may not have legally binding impact, or it may or may not have lasting impact. But it's a fairly focused event. And this is an event that is really designed to stimulate thinking, to stimulate new partnerships. And from that perspective, it was extremely successful. I think we really have to recognize, first off, the role of the government of China, it's in its various levels, from the central government, Ministry of Housing, the province of Nanjing, or Jiangxi province, and the city of Nanjing, all invested a tremendous amount of their resources and their time and staff in this event. And it was truly impressive. And the Chinese provinces and cities participated on a massive scale. They put together a whole side event that was kind of a trade fair, showing how Chinese cities are dealing with urban infrastructure problems. And it was very impressive. And it was very well attended by the Chinese public and also the participants from around the world. And looking forward to Rio, I think we can say, based on the effort that the Brazilian government put into which was intended to be a short preview of the event in Rio, but which extended into a lengthy kind of samba extravaganza at the final event. It indicates that Brazilians are equally enthusiastic about putting together a venue that can also have a similar effect on all of the participants. And another feature of the event where I understand there were 8,000 participants all told, maybe not all there at the same day at the same time, but a very large number. And it included governments, private sector, NGOs, development agencies, local government, provincial government, some regional organizations, organizations of municipal authorities, such as the Commonwealth Association of Cities, which played a very prominent role. And that variety was reflective of the problems of urban policy, which inevitably involve multiple layers of government, multiple sectors of the economy. And I have to extend my sympathies to the organizers in trying to figure out how to put together a schedule that could ensure sort of a minimum of the cross-fertilization, among all the different participants. And one of the observations that I think many of the participants had about the forum is that because there are so many events, it's problematic often for individuals who are participating to figure out how to best take advantage of all those events. And I think probably one organizational recommendation for the future would be to try and have a schedule established as much in advance as possible, so that people can have a little more time to think about how to deploy. I think the actual site was very well organized, very well marked. It was easy to find things. And that all reflected the Chinese organizational capacity. No problem there. And I think one of the things that most impressed me was the large number of young people who were participating from around the world, especially developing countries, Africa, Latin America, Central America, and the enthusiasm that they showed. And there were many opportunities for youth leaders in local urban NGOs to make presentations and to participate in panels. And I was very impressed with the level of discourse at those panels and some of the innovative ideas that these NGOs that gave every appearance of being truly grassroots organizations showed. And you had situations where there were, young people who in their own country would never have an opportunity to speak directly to a ministerial level or even provincial or city level government, who had that opportunity thanks to this forum. And I think that's one of its really exciting features. And of course, from the U.S. side, USAID put together a number of very interesting presentations, and Jessica Tolodo even stood in, I think, for colleagues at the Housing and Urban Development Department who were unable to come, to make sure that their messages were presented as well. And we'll hear more, I'm sure, when Jessica makes her presentation about that. We did have a document which Blair referred to that's finally coming out, and the governments that participated did have a very abbreviated and sort of light version of the kind of discussion about the document that is typical in UN meetings. And I think that was handled very well and appropriately for this type of event. And I'm sure that the report will have a variety of ideas that will reflect the variety of participants in the forum, and we'll look forward to that. And of course, for the United States, we're at the beginning of a transition in government, and all of us who are in government are sort of looking for indications from the new team as to what new directions they might like to take. And an event like the Urban Forum was very useful for us in terms of presenting a very full spectrum of all the possible ideas that we might think of proposing to our new political leadership here when they look at how to deal with urban issues. So we have quite a bag of tricks that we can draw from thanks to that event. I'm very pleased that this event is happening for another reason, and that is because one of the thoughts that occurred to our group as we were completing this sort of almost overwhelming kaleidoscope of events is, how do you organize follow-up to it that takes advantage of the richness of the discussion? And this type of event, which I understand is being webcast, which is excellent, is a good example of how to organize follow-up. And I'm sure that many of the other NGOs that participated have been doing, are doing, will do similar things between now and the Rio meeting. And I think I'm looking forward to the kinds of questions and ideas that emerge at this meeting to help us think about the way forward on addressing urban issues. Another thought that occurred just through the contact with the people at the World Urban Forum is that there was a potential for a really useful Rolodex or a database of experts and groups that are interested in these issues that could be very useful for all the participants and others who weren't there who are interested in these issues. And we had some discussions while we were there with the UN Habitat folks about how best to take advantage of that. And it's something that I hope that UN Habitat will continue to think about. There obviously are some technical challenges and sort of methodological issues on how you address the question of what is the status of all the people who participated. But it is a tremendous resource. There's one other thought that occurred to many, and I'm not sure that there's a good way to handle it in a 3-day event with 8,000 people. But that is, by necessity, there are many events that happen at the same time. And to some extent, those events competed for the same subset of participants. And I think a fair amount of overlap in audiences is inevitable in a meeting like that. But I think having a schedule or a draft of a schedule a little sooner would be helpful in trying to minimize the amount of conflict inflicted on participants in choosing between equally interesting events that they'd like to participate in. And finally, a comment just on UN Habitat in general as a UN organization. My bureau in the Department of State is the bureau that funds a core contribution to UN Habitat out of our I was going to say small, but small is a relative concept, out of our budget for voluntary contributions to international organizations. And that budget is subject to all kinds of competition, as you might imagine, from all the large and small UN organizations. But we've been very impressed with management reform at Habitat and the improved focus and strategic planning, which we're supporting, and we've recommended an increase in the relatively small U.S. contribution, which we hope will be approved whenever Congress gets around to actually taking up the State Department budget. And we hope that those improvements continue in the future and will continue on a similar trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Judith?
Sorry for that momentary technical glitch. I'll just check out the technical equipment first. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on such a wet, somewhat dreary morning and braving the Washington traffic. And thanks to Blair and the Woodrow Wilson Center, Lauren, Allison for hosting this. And I have to say I'm really delighted to be here on the panel with Chris and Jessica and Jerry to talk about what I think, I echo what Jerry said, a really very productive session at Nanjing. Oops. Alerts me, I guess. And I'm going to talk about the participation and the World Urban Forum, quite naturally, I suppose, from the perspective of CHF International. And we are, I suppose, we fit under the category in the UN system of the international NGO. We don't necessarily think of ourselves quite that way. We are a not-for-profit international development and humanitarian assistance organization. And we have an array of technical specialties, but we also have deep roots in the set of urban issues and in housing delivery. We started life as some of you in this room. It's nice to see all the old friends and colleagues here too, as well as new ones, of course. As the Cooperative Housing Foundation. And so we have maintained a great deal of interest in the urban agenda, and we like to think also that we have been somewhat influential in the introduction of microfinance of housing and other things. In any event, you might be interested why a not-for-profit organization would invest, as we did, in attending the World Urban Forum. And we sent a team of 10 from our headquarters and the field. And we also sponsored a panel, a networking event, in which we invited international presenters from several different countries. And we got some grant support for that. But we also felt it was very important that it not just be the collection of CHF talking, but that we include, as is very basic to our methodology, our international partners. We sponsored a booth, and we also were fortunate enough to be able to have sponsor a networking event at which these international experts spoke. There's our team minus one, somewhat squat, at least on my screen, but nonetheless, as you see, we were there, as I was saying to Jessica earlier, in force. And that's our exhibit booth. And we focused it, we did some quote-unquote propaganda, some information about what CHF does in the urban area. But we also did, as you can see in the center there, that's a very large display that indicates a community planning process that we're using very effectively under our Bill and Melinda Gates program called Scale Up it's taking place in a couple of countries. It's a learning agenda for community planning and real participation. Everybody nods in that direction, linking up the planning at a community level with national resources, which in India, fortunately, are available for this sort of thing. And I have to say, it attracted enormous attention. It went through the sort of 4 phases and visualized for people what the phases of the planning and the input and the result of the community participation were. So what were the benefits for CHF? Why did we invest actually, for us anyway, talk about small budgets, it's all relative, and for us, substantial of our resources. We feel it's very important. We like to think of ourselves again as being alive to new ideas and wanted to learn about promising practices of others and to learn from them. We wanted to do the networking, and I have to say, I'm generally somewhat a skeptic on the subject of networking. It seems to me just kind of a lot of talk and nice times, and what does it lead to? In this case, I actually stand corrected on my assumption. It was really one, I think, in our staff, our team would agree, one of the real highlights of WOOF 4 for us, the chance to have the exchange with people, whether it's in the hangar cafeteria or in the locus of our booth, much more than we ever expected. And also very interestingly for us, we've had, quite a lot of follow-up, and yet some more follow-up to happen with people who came by and we talked to and met there. And I think that we really enriched our own perspectives, and we hope that we contributed some to others through that process. Of course, we wanted to share our own experience and philosophy in the urban arena, and it also provided us with the opportunity to gain some perspective on what we ourselves have been doing. Of course, we try to be, shall we say, alert to our learnings and to be quite analytical about what we do. But an opportunity such as WOOF 4 provides is a chance to stand back, to look at what you're doing, what you've accomplished, and to sort of sum up. And I think that that's a very interesting gift in a way that something like this gave to us. And then to be able to put it into the context of what other people are doing. Our own experience, I don't need to go through all of that, but we have done a lot of work, and in fact we're one of the pioneers of integrated responses to slum upgrading, meaning not simply the physical infrastructure, but the socio and economic inputs as well, and various kinds of approaches to housing and addressing the urban issues. I would kind of emphasize the last 3 bullets here for us, the citizen participation, which I don't want to at all appear to be apologizing for. It is absolutely fundamental. But a lot of people nod in that direction without it being sufficiently structured and carried out in a way where it is meaningful. In some cases, it's more a matter of checking the boxes. And for us, it's really integral to what we do. Innovation in finance, how one can make various solutions affordable and available, and of course responsive governance. It is not enough just to have communities mobilized, but governments, they need to know how to work with governments at all levels and all appropriate levels, and vice versa. So those are very important things. Now, coming myself, as well as CHF, from this long history of engagement in urban issues, things have changed in the outside world. And so at WOOF 4, we were hoping also to learn how people are addressing some of the new challenges of increasingly mobile populations. And maybe I should even add here information exchange, instantaneous, the phenomenon of international migration, how that impacts on some of our own methodologies, such as what I was saying, citizen participation being extremely important in planning a community. But if that community is composed of people who have come for a short while from another country, or a short while, define your terms, but don't think of it necessarily as their home, what is their stake in that community? How do they enter into the real participation? The issue that the world, and not only the urban agenda, but concentration in some of the urban areas, the preponderance of youth, and often without the appropriate skills to be able to participate constructively within the workforce or within society. Issues related to security, increasingly, not telling you anything you don't know, but challenging world from that point of view. Climate change. What effect is the increasing urban environments, the increasing density and the size of them having on climate, and what effect is climate change having on those populations? It's kind of an iterative thing. People who are very vulnerable, a lot of natural disasters focus in these areas. How can one best go about addressing these? And then the transborder issues of health, trafficking, counterfeiting of medicines and other things that are sent forth as under the guise of being real. I myself am a great admirer of the informal economy, and I think it has enormous energy and potential, and to our peril, we collectively as an international development community take it into sufficient account. Having said that, there is a dark side, and it is increasingly emerging. How does one address that? At the same time, not stifling or just even acknowledging its place. And then, for myself and for CHF, how do we make the case? I mean, I'm delighted to hear that the support for UN Habitat is increasing from the U.S. government, and I do hope that with this change of administration that there will be much more focus on the urban set of urban issues, making the case, but somehow we, and I'm including everybody in this room, maybe erroneously, but as part of a constituency who understands and believes in the importance of urban development, affects us all, not just those who are living in a particular urban area. The case is, it's sort of a no-brainer. It's rapid urban growth, increasing urbanization, accelerating urban poverty, and then also on the positive side, the relationship between urban and economic development. So it seems to me, and then of course, I'm sure others will mention this, but the startling fact that now, today, last year, more people live in urban areas than elsewhere. I won't go through all the facts and figures because you know them, but it's really important. So why are we not focusing more resources and time and energy? So WOOF 4 was really very welcome from our point of view, very timely, both because it did allow us to do this, but also in the U.S. terms, focusing on some changes perhaps in policy. And, Asia, Africa, we all know that those are the areas particularly to emphasize. So I won't go into that. Now, the challenges for us coming out of WOOF 4, and for us being CHF, but I would probably submit for all of us, is how do we translate theory into widespread practice? Probably if I went around the room, many of you would already think you know what needs to be done. Whether we'd all agree on what needs to be done, I'm not sure. But how do we translate that into something that is widespread? How do we actually reach a scale? And how do we then continue to understand the changing environment, urban dynamics? And how do we address complexity? Because I would submit, I think that's one of the reasons why the urban agenda and the set of issues that accompany it have not really been addressed. And despite everything, this is tough love here, I don't think that we have adequately stepped up, we as a world, stepped up to the challenge of meeting the urban issues. If you look around in any capital in the developing world, you see a vast proliferation of what anybody would describe as inappropriate living situation for people. And it's really, urban is just a subcomponent of the Millennium Development Goals. And I think that people are discouraged by the complexity. It's, oh my God, all those people, how could we possibly address it? What can we do? Why don't we focus on something that's manageable and solvable? I think that's burying our head in the sand, and we need to challenge ourselves. I think we have the solutions. It's maybe orchestrating them and finding the way, not shying away because it's complicated, but finding the way forward. And of course, then it gets, disempowered populations are both the cause and effect of some of this. So I've already talked a little bit about some of the new complexities that I do feel we need to address. And we think as CHF, and this is one of the things that we were able to discuss with some of our colleagues, that there are approaches with promising potential, that there are private sector and business models that have their own energy, not just, well, how do we transplant a pilot project from here to other places, but something that carries its own momentum with it. And we think that there's a lot of scope for that. We think that the interdependence and organic linkages between constituencies in an urban area is a positive, and once people really understand that, then participation in policy and governance can be more effective. And then, of course, the issue it applies in a number of areas of what is appropriate regulation and governance, because surely there needs to be that, and what is the appropriate leveraging. Debt, as we have sadly learned recently, is not always the best solution to a problem. And inclusiveness, how does one build an urban community, which some people might say is an oxymoron. I'm not one of them, but still. So, with all of these things in mind, CHF was lucky enough to be selected for a sponsored networking event at WOOF. And they were called networking events, which is separate from the networking itself. And they're really the sessions, for those of you who weren't there, in which ideas were debated and discussed. And there were many, many interesting ones. And just footnote here, I would echo what you said, Jerry, about the conflicts in schedule. I found so many things that were happening at the same time. It was really hard to choose. And anyway, so we commissioned some studies. We called it Back to the Future, Deconstructing Urban Change, because you could only have 7 words in your title. Maybe that was a good discipline. And nonetheless, what we wanted to do was to work with some of our partners to look back over a period of 10 or so years to see what we could understand from what has happened subsequent to urban investment and interventions. So there were case studies from Morocco, Brazil, Senegal, and India. What has happened? And the session, we're very pleased, was well attended by over 100 people, and we got a lot of very positive feedback of it. Whoops, sorry, the wrong way. There we are. I'll show you I'm not just making this up. And so what are the takeaways from our session? This is still a work in progress, and CHF will be actually publishing our analysis of it, plus the case studies that were prepared in. We do a series of occasional papers cleverly called International Development Matters, and our next issue will be focused on the papers that were prepared for this. So some of the takeaways that we have so far are that many of the positive effects of the urban interventions continue across time. For those who've wondered, is this just money that's been strewn across the water or the urban landscape? The answer is no, from our case studies, though the outcomes aren't always the same. For the most part, our presenters have found that the urban neighborhoods where these investments were made have in fact moved and are more prosperous than they were at the time that the interventions were made. Cause effect's difficult, so I'm not going to attribute that to it, but it is at least an interesting relationship. Interestingly to us, and of course we're happy to see this because it confirms some of what we think, is that the bricks and mortar in and of itself does not seem to be so effective. It is more important, at least in some of the surveys that were carried out in conjunction with these case studies, people attributed some of their ability to progress and the importance that they attribute that they got from the programs through job creation, income, and the human services, the other social services that were provided. So bricks and mortar alone seems to be not the wisest investment without attention to the other. Sorry, I keep going the wrong way. Some of the other investments that go along with this. Understanding that urban development is not simply about having building codes and well-constructed buildings. It's partly about that, but not solely. And also that the private sector in many of its aspects has a positive role to play in pro-urban development. For us, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge is to unleash and channel its energy. Slow learner here. Additional takeaways: effective community engagement in development local planning is really critical to success. In those places where they seem to be continuing and robust development, the local participation was critical. That when it happened doesn't guarantee that it's going to be successful, and we found actually in one of our own, which was not one of the case studies that we presented, but we did some analysis of our own work in South Africa, one of the communities where we worked, and there was extensive citizen participation and consultation, that community had basically stagnated for reasons that were actually external to the process. So it's not a panacea, but those that were flourishing seemed to very much have needed or required or have included a robust planning process. And then the focus on economic integration seems to be important to success. And I think this is one of the keys to this idea of inclusiveness, what is the inclusive city, new sort of buzzword or phrase. What does that mean? And I think it's partly the concept of it's not those people over there in the slums and we don't talk to them or we take helicopters to fly over to get to our places of residence, but that, their fate, the health, all sorts of things, or the trans-border or the trans-community issues are important, but also that the city doesn't become ghettoized, where there are mixed income developments, where there are opportunities for people to live at various socioeconomic levels, seems to be very important to the success of the urban interventions. I keep doing it. So where do we go from here? And looking forward to WOOF 5, I would say that more does need to be done to understand and learn from the past. And for our part, CHF will be trying to undertake that task in a systematic way, together with our partners. I mean, reinventing the wheel is not really necessary. And one of our panelists in the Back to the Future session at WOOF 4, gentleman from India, spoke very eloquently and quite passionately about not just having the same conversation. We need to move the agenda forward. And so I think we have a real responsibility as we look to WOOF 5 to do that. So more needs to be done to understand and learn from the past, but more also needs to be done to anticipate and structure new responses to the changing world context, because the urban context of today is not the same as when these were. Did I change that? Sorry. I'm sorry. So WOOF 5, I think we need to have embraced the complexity, found a way to do that. I look at our colleagues here around the table. We need to be able to show that we have gained ground, that we are not just having the same conversations. We need to show results. We need to articulate and demonstrate that urban issues affect us all. And I would say that maybe should be at the top of this list and prior to WOOF 5, because part of what we're going to be able to do and talk about as a world community at WOOF 5 depends upon the resources that are being allocated and the policy approaches that we take. the urban agenda, and I would invite you all to join with us, is not just about, well, helping the cities lift themselves up by their bootstraps, but it is actually not to be too grandiose about it, the fate of the world as we know it. So that's all. Thank you very much.
I was just on. Sorry. All right, well, good morning, everyone. And I think we've already done lots of thank yous and acknowledging of the miserable rain outside. My son and I got soaking wet coming in this morning, but I'm glad you all made it. And I see a lot of familiar faces around the table. And that's actually going to be my first comment, which is we do tend to be consistently speaking to the choir. And we've said this at past CUSP events. We have yet, as has been noted, really been effective at creating a message that is compelling and easy to understand and that grabs a larger audience. And we seem to continually be speaking to the same group of people who are already sold on the notion that urban is important and we need to deal with the challenges and that they are critical and that it's a wave that's just started and is only going to be getting bigger. And we all know that. We all know the facts, and we all know kind of what's out there, what's working and what's not. And we really do need to figure out how we get and capture the imagination of policymakers and others beyond those in this room. And I think, just as a general comment about WOOF from the perspective of a member of the small U.S. government delegation, and I was very pleased that we had Jerry Anderson there, such a senior level official from the State Department. We had the permanent secretary, representative to the UN Habitat, and colleague Klaus is sitting in the audience here, and me from USAID. That was it, and no one from HUD. And we had few to no, I think, U.S. cities attending WOOF, but we did have CHF, ICMA, the International City County Management Association, Habitat for Humanity International, had booths, and Development Innovations Group. The NGOs were there and well represented, and they did an excellent job of, representing some of U.S. best practice and the American development community and what we bring to the table. But it was very disappointing that we did not have U.S. mayors and city managers there, as we did from other countries. And now China's far, far away. For Americans, maybe that was it, but I don't think it was all that vastly different at Vancouver. And I think as we look forward, we do need to think about how we tap into the community we have here in the United States. Why are we failing to capture their imagination and bring them in more? If we have an organization like ICMA, which is the premier association of city managers here in the U.S. and a source of information and professional, it's a professional association, a source of information and leadership for its members. How do we tap into a broader audience through their base and others and bring them into this discussion and bring them to bear on our leaders on the Hill and others at USAID? These days we're a very small team at USAID. I'm one of 5. Ron's where are you, Ron? Ron retired recently, so we lost some of our few remaining folks. So I was the most senior USAID representative there, and that's something I hope that we will see differently the next time around. And I think there is some cause for hope. There are discussions internally at USAID. There are discussions outside of USAID that perhaps urban will be a little bit higher on the agenda in the future. But I do think it's important that we figure out how to broaden our network and our community and take advantage of the new urban policy unit that may be standing up at the White House and figure out how we begin to get American cities, elected officials and managers to see outside the borders and how important this is and to elevate the discussion here in Washington. So having said that, I did think, for me personally, WOOF was a very exciting and event, and it was one that did capture my imagination, and I came back feeling charged and energized and ready to go, and decided, okay, I'm not going to bid out next year and leave back overseas. I'll stay here and help out our little urban team kind of turn things around and not give up the good fight, because there's a lot of exciting stuff going on there, and USAID does have a long and very good track record of working on these issues, and that shouldn't go away. And although we were a small presence, I think we were an important presence at WWOOF. Between USAID and HUD and our various U.S. implementing partners, had a number of networking sessions that we sponsored or participated in. And I'll just touch on a few of the issues that were discussed that I felt were particularly important, and kind of figure into some of the thinking we have going on at USAID right now as we think about what are our recommendations for the way forward. And those issues first, they're not earth-shattering, but city management and service delivery. We worked with ICMA, it was co-sponsored by HUD, to do a session on geographic information technologies, geospatial information technologies, and which is a tool for city managers. It's a tool for planners. It's a tool for the finance director. It's a tool to be used to make better decisions and effectively utilize limited city government resources, to figure out how better to plan for, how better to deliver services, how to make those investments in infrastructure, and to figure out the soft side too, as to how it all comes together and what makes the most sense. And that was a very well attended session, lots of questions, considerable interest, and something that I think particularly doesn't get much attention at USAID. We think it's a technology that's too advanced for the places we operate in. But the point was not the technology. The point was about how you gather information, how you make decisions, and how that impacts the way the city operates. And I think ICMA did an excellent job in pulling together a great panel and a series of case studies that demonstrated the value of that tool in making effective decisions. And I was particularly impressed, though, by our colleague from China that HUD organized, who gave one of the best presentations I've ever seen, frankly, that was unbelievably clear, concise, and to the point, kind of boom, 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 here's how we use GIS to make decisions and impact the built environment, economic development and creation of jobs, the environment, natural resources, etc. And it was a very effective and powerful presentation. I was quite impressed with that. So, first item, city management and service delivery. Although the infrastructure and the bricks and mortar is not the only thing, it is critical, and a city needs to provide those services, and the services that are both the hard services and the soft, and it needs to come together. Tied to that is the second issue, which is local economic development. It's kind of hard to have economic development if you don't have some base of infrastructure and some functioning local government and some sort of community and private sector. USAID is supporting a group, or kind of a new network or association, the Local Economic Development Network of Africa, and they launched this network, LEDNA, at WWOOF. Again, very well attended. The room was packed, standing room only. And one of the things that I think is important to note there is that, another statistic I'm sure you're all familiar with, that Africa has the highest urban growth rates in the world currently. And certainly at AID, we still tend to think of Africa as rural, and it's rural poverty. We need to focus on agriculture and the current environments, the food crisis being a major issue for many, and understandably so. That has diverted some attention to kind of reasserting the notion that Africa is rural and we need to think about agriculture. But Africa is highest urban growth rates, and that's just going to continue. And they too will catch up with the rest of the world that has surpassed that benchmark of 50-50. And we need to think about how to work with local governments and municipalities in Africa to capture and benefit from this urban growth. Again, looking in the past, nothing new. We all know that for much of the world, growth has come with urbanization. And as a country moves from low income to mid income, you can see the urban growth rates that correspond with that rising. Africa has not been seeing that same kind of benefit to date. So the question is, how do we help? Infrastructure is a big part of that. They are way, way behind in infrastructure, and part of it is helping local governments, communities, and the private sector to pull all those resources together to promote local economic development. So I think a network like LEDNA that really is one of the things they'll be doing, and that Jerry noted, we need this kind of roster of expertise, is creating that roster of expertise, although focused specifically on Africa, and putting up those case studies, not just best practices that are static and it's nice and you read it and you think, gosh, how do I really make that work here, but doing the kinds of things that ICMA has done successfully elsewhere, which is best practice transfer. How do we begin to partner south to south to say, okay, this has worked in my community. Things may be a little different where you are, but there are ways that we can learn from each other and make that happen. And so local economic development, a subset of that, and Judith touched on this, is youth. We all know there's a youth bulge, and a lot of that is in the developing world and in cities and in slums. And lots of discussion, although not necessarily empirical evidence, but of the connection between youth, unemployment, instability, conflict, and the like. So certainly from a U.S. government perspective, an issue that is of much concern to us these days. And from the urban team at USAID, we like to think of youth employability within the context of local economic development. And a panel that the International Youth Foundation sponsored, they kindly added USAID's name to that co-sponsorship. They're a partner of ours. And I participated in that panel. Well, we had one of the panelists was from Medellin, from Colombia, and again, an incredibly impressive presentation of a local initiative led by the mayor and other senior kind of members of the government, the city government, that said, we want to do something different in our community. We want to make a difference. And bringing together the private sector, the community, and the local government, and looking at local economic development and addressing the needs of the youth in a broader context and taking a comprehensive approach. And in that particular case, the built environment, and although I'm a planner only by educational background, I was still very thrilled to see all the lovely pictures of a library and a community center and the dramatic transformation it had on those neighborhoods, and how the elected officials working with the private sector and working with the community were able to make a difference. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to figure out, how do we foster that. And in a new partnership that we have now with IYF, we're really pushing this approach of looking at youth employability, not just as a work with the NGO to do youth training, and yes, you need to kind of take a look at what does the job market need, what do businesses need, and there they go, but how do you institutionalize things? How do you look at it within the broader context of building a stronger city, building a stronger community? And so next area is the community and slum dwellers, and USAID had nothing to do with this session, but it was one of the best that I attended, and it was incredibly inspiring, the session that Slum Dwellers International put on. Again, packed room, dancing and singing and ululations. It was very exciting, and just a lot of great stories. And one of the things we want to look at as we go forward at USAID is how do we facilitate that? I think we've been very good in the past of looking at kind of at the municipal level, working with the local government on planning, maybe city strategic plans like we promote through the Cities Alliance, but it doesn't really get down to the grassroots level, and it doesn't really connect with slum communities. And then we have the NGO or community-based approach. So NGOs maybe go in and are working at the slum level and working with the community level and bypassing the government. And that just doesn't seem to be an effective solution. So how do we do the kinds of things that SDI has done themselves? How can we promote that to really bring effectively the two together? And we're hoping to be supporting some initiatives this year that will support those kinds of experiments and begin to test new waters, because I think Judith was right. We've done a lot of good things and we need to learn from the past, but we also need to figure out how to do something a little differently and acknowledge that the slums are growing rapidly, and we need to find more effective ways to tap into that energy. the last two areas to touch on, just in terms of not so much what I was able to look at or discuss at WOOF, but important issues and that I think are critical for moving forward. This time at Vancouver, we discussed finance a lot, and AID has been involved in supporting subnational finance, municipal finance, infrastructure finance, housing finance, however you want to call it, in its variety of ways for a long time, and I think rather successfully. Unfortunately, this time around at WOOF, we were not supporting any sessions on that. They was not accepted, but that's the other piece. You need the local government, you need the private sector, you need the community, and you do need the infrastructure, and it costs money, and the donors don't have all the resources. But as Judith noted, how do we find an appropriate level of leveraging? How do we get the regulatory framework in place? How do we make sure that local governments or utilities are financially viable, are worthy of receiving loans, and capable of utilizing that money effectively? So that remains an issue on the table that we continue to need to address and push as we move forward. And then the last area, aid is still very much involved in global climate change, but not so much in thinking about urban areas and transportation. We did, for a short while at least in the past, when I first joined aid, but kind of dwindled away. But as we move forward, it's a critical issue. I think I have one little statistic here that it's estimated that urban areas account for as much as 78% of all human-generated emissions. And one of many arguments, urban used to be a part of what was the Environment Center at USAID in Washington, and some folks don't think urban belongs in environment. Well, you guys are the bad guys. You're the creators of pollution, and you're the industries there, and it's overconsumption, and all that's bad. In my opinion, as again educational background, but as an urban planner, is people need to be we need to be centralized. We need to congregate, leave our green space where it is healthy and clean, and we just need to be a bit more effective about how we consume and how we utilize our resources. And I hope that USAID will re-engage on looking at how cities impact the environment and how cities contribute to global climate change, and then, of course, adaptability and how they deal with it as we move forward with so many cities living in coastal areas and impact on food, the linkages between urban and rural areas, et cetera. So for future, I think as we move towards Vancouver, is figuring out how we orient ourselves at USAID and as a kind of a development and practitioner community and within the larger U.S. government's leadership. And particularly, how do we tap into the resources that we have in the U.S., the cities and the city managers and the mayors, and how do we begin to engage them more effectively and begin to see how what we do can contribute to and is tied with what's happening in the rest of the world. I know as Americans we are particularly insular. It's a problem across the board, but we have much more vibrant communities in the environment sector, in concerned about HIV/AIDS, maternal and child health, that looks outside of our borders. So how do we do that for cities? And with that, I will say thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blair and Judith, for organizing this event. I think it's extremely encouraging that UN Habitat is not organizing this event. I think it's a good sign. It's a good sign because if I was trumping that horn and trying to get this type of event together, the impetus would be with UN, and instead it's with U.S. institutions. And I think that really bodes well to the next 2 years. And I will, as Jessica has mentioned, I'm going to be a bit provocative in terms of what we can do in the next 2 years collectively as a community in the U.S. But before that, I wanted to touch on 3 broad topics and then end with where do we go from here in terms of U.S. response. The first is a bit of history, very quickly, in terms of how we came to the World Urban Forum Secondly, some reflections on the World Urban Forum in Nanjing. Third is what we're doing as an institution globally to try to leverage the World Urban Forum for advocacy purposes. Briefly on the history. The idea of having a World Urban Forum actually went through many incarnations and many fits and starts within the UN bureaucratic systems, not just in UN Habitat, but as far as the General Assembly, the UN system, system-wide. Historically, UN Habitat had an urban environmental forum, which ran in complete isolation to an international urban poverty forum. These were undertaken in the follow-up to the Istanbul conference, Habitat II conference in Istanbul in 1996. And they were efforts to try to do essentially what WUF is doing now. But we didn't have, in a sense, a way to mainstream that within UN Habitat and more broadly within the UN system. So when the General Assembly met in 2000 and 2001 to try to look at how to deal with the broader issue of how to elevate UN Habitat from a fairly peripheral center in the UN system to a member of the funds and programs, is now shifted to the Center for Human Settlements, to the United Nations Human Settlements Program. As part of that effort to shift, they recognized that advocacy and outreach was crucial, and they needed to in a sense, integrate these two entities, the Urban Environmental Forum and the International Forum on Urban Poverty, and to elevate this to the level of a global forum. In a sense, like the World Economic Forum, the World Social Forum, the World Urban Forum. And this is not something that any of you have worked in large government bureaucracies or intergovernmental bodies. This is not an easy undertaking. I mean, to be able to get the General Assembly to sign on to this and member states to say, okay, yeah, that's the way to move forward. The member states are reluctant to have a global forum for every issue. So I think the fact that they chose to elevate the World Urban Forum to the status of a UN international forum was an extremely important precedent. At the time, it didn't seem like much to those that weren't involved in it, but we wouldn't have had the World Urban Forum the way we have it right now as a vehicle for advocacy if we didn't have that sort of buy-in from member states. So I'm just trying to capture some relative, I know it's dinosaur incremental progress, but you sometimes have to take a step back and reflect how far you've come before you can push to move forward. So I think my first point is that the history has been checkered and bumpy, but I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of situating this forum globally as a mechanism for bringing together very different groups of people. And as Jerry said, it's not your typical intergovernmental meeting. In fact, it's a very interesting space for non-state actors to interface with the state, which I think is equally so in the World Economic Forum and produces similar kind of interchanges between state and non-state actors. And I think that's what's an extremely important element of that. In terms of my reflections on WUF 4, we've sort of come into this from the first one in Nairobi, then the next one in Barcelona, the third one in Vancouver, and now this one in Nanjing. I'm always impressed with the actual numbers. To be specific, it's 4,900 participants. 24% participants are from local authorities. It's quite a high figure. 13.5% from national governments, 14.3% from non-governmental organizations, 13% from private sector, and 11% from academia. These statistics are going to be available in this report that Blair had mentioned, and we'll make that available on the internet as well as to those that would like the full report sent to them electronically. But my point is that I think that's a pretty interesting spread. Maybe the U.S. representation wasn't as reflective of that as it might have been, but there were 127 Americans who participated in the World Urban Forum. They weren't necessarily a part of the U.S. delegation, but I think they weren't necessarily the right. They weren't of the same proportional distribution as the overall conference, and that's something to work towards for further World Urban Forums. Another reflection is, yes, it is hard to manage the World Urban Forum. It's too much happening at the same time, and we've tried many times to try to organize sub-themes and sub-themes. We find at the end of the day that it's almost impossible, that in a sense the repeat customer is the best, most satisfied customer, because they learn how to navigate the World Urban Forum. They know ahead of time through their partner networks what to do and what not to do, and they leave open space to try to come in to deal with things. And I think there's always room for improvement, and we welcome suggestions, and I think we should really take stock of those suggestions, not just the ones that Jerry's made, but from all of you, to improve on the World Urban Forum. We had a very vast questionnaire that we distributed that we're now consolidating and taking stock of. But I think in general, what I liked about this particular World Urban Forum is it really was two events. One was the expo, the large hangar, and the other was the meetings and the events. And the large hangar, in a sense, in many ways, was extremely powerful, because it allowed the kind of free-form exchange and spontaneous meetings that wouldn't have happened if you were attending a particular meeting and you wanted to follow up with somebody in that meeting. There was something happening that existed. Also, the fact that people use their displays, in a sense, as nodes for meetings. Maybe people shot off to the coffee session, but the issue is that your exhibitions and those of people from other countries, in a way, were opportunities to not only promote what you're doing, but also to engage. And I think there's something we need to think more about, that exhibition, almost like a trade fair element, is as important as the actual meetings and exchange that take place in the formal sessions, the parallel events and panels. Another observation is that I think what my impression is that the different partner networks that were there, local authorities, private sector, NGOs, youth, professional organizations, governments, etc. I think as we get deeper into the World Urban Forum each time, people become much more sophisticated in terms of what they want to get out of these meetings. They integrate their national or international meetings, and they have them on the occasion of the World Urban Forum. People become sort of smart in using resources. Rather than having another global event somewhere in the world, they integrate that with the World Urban Forum. And that, I think, is people are becoming sort of smarter in how they handle the World Urban Forum. And also, I think institutions are trying to get more out of it. Like we said with the slum up, what was mentioned in terms of the Slum and Choctaws International, they've now been at this meeting 4 times, and they've become extremely sophisticated in how they utilize that time there, not only for really creative and innovative events, but they span out. I mean, they're like an insurgents team. It's incredible. I mean, these guys work that 7,900. They're extraordinary because they're organizers. That's their background. And so I think that there's a level of sophistication not only in the forum and what structures China, in this case, and the UN Habitat could set up, but it's also a higher level of sophistication of the participants as they get more strategic in how they utilize this space. I have a lot of other reflections, but in the interest of time, and I know Jerry's got to go at 10:30, let me now switch towards future directions. My third point in terms of where we're going with this. What was clear for us as an institution was that the World Urban Forum is much bigger than UN Habitat, and that's great news. That means that this thing is taking off in a direction that is beyond a UN agency. It's a space now that a lot of institutions are finding useful, a lot of different partners at different levels are finding useful, and it's not necessarily up to UN Habitat and that member state. In a sense, we're creating a space, but how that space is used is up to the different partners that come. And I think we have to be better at creating that space so it's easier for partners to use it. But in a sense, it's taking a life of its own. And I think what Mrs. Tibaijuka is the executive director of UN Habitat is taking note of is that, in a sense, we need to leverage that World Urban Forum. We need to, in a sense, be much more strategic in how we select themes that take place during the World Urban Forum, how we integrate that within a larger advocacy strategy of what we call a global campaign for sustainable urbanization and all of its component parts, and how we as an institution begin to fold the different elements that we have, our governing council sub-themes, our business forums, our new magazine that we've launched, our efforts for fundraising, our entire external relations strategy and promotion of this issue is now going to be tailored toward the World Urban Forum. In other words, how we strategically identify the next one in Brazil and build all of our events leading up to that. So in a sense, from an internal organizing standpoint, this has become a very powerful vehicle for consolidation and organization. And this has touched on Jerry's point of how you become better managed as an institution. How do you utilize a strategic planning exercise? And how do you use the World Urban Forum, in a sense, as a consolidating vehicle? Now, my reason for mentioning this this extension is not so much to talk about habitat, but I think we all, as partners, should also consider that. In other words, how do you use the World Urban Forum to advance this agenda? As mentioned, this is a fairly incestuous internal crowd. We always tend to be talking to each other, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And this now shifts to the World Urban Forum and sort of where we go as U.S. entities. I'll take off my UN hat and talk as a U.S. national. I think that we need to really think strategically about Brazil. How do we move from here to Brazil as a community? And as Jessica's saying, how do we complement this group with a much deeper engagement in the private sector, a much deeper engagement in U.S. Conference of Cities, League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, much deeper engagement with the financial community, National Association of Mortgage Bankers. How do we dig much more deeply in domestic development issues on urban themes? How do we deal with the community development corporations of the United States? How do we deal with community development financial intermediaries? How do we deal with neighbor works organizations, etc.? How do we deal with U.S. urban development issues as an extremely important constituency that is undertapped, as far as I'm concerned, in the World Urban Forum? Now, why am I advocating this? Because as Jerry's saying, and Judith's saying, and Jessica's saying, a constituency for urban issues is a sine qua non. It's absolutely a precondition to elevate international urban development. You cannot, if you want the support of the U.S. Congress and you want this to be a front burner issue, you have to build a domestic constituency. And in order to build a domestic constituency, you have to move, in a sense, outside of the networks in Washington and dig much deeper into the urban development issues. Now, my hope is that there are a lot of opportunities that exist right now that didn't exist as short as 6 months ago. We have a U.S. White House Office of Urban Policies, as has been mentioned earlier. There's no reason why this entity couldn't have an international component, or at least a bridge function between the domestic and the global. We have an extremely interesting former Commissioner of Housing who's been nominated as the new HUD Secretary. This is somebody who's young, gets the finance issues, gets the community issues, gets the urban development and planning issues. This is, in a sense, a very progressive person, not perfect, but very up-to-date in terms of what has the pulse of what is innovative in urban development issues and creative approaches to affordable housing. This is an extraordinary opportunity. And historically, UN Habitat has liaised with the Secretary of Housing, as well as the ministers of housing in all the countries that we liaise with, to, in a sense, push this issue forward. So I think the combination of Sean Donovan and the former Bronxborough president, if these two people are confirmed to be the Secretary of HUD and the Director of U.S. of the White House Office of Urban Policy, I think we have a real opportunity there. Next level is Congress. I've been very fortunate in having 7 members of Congress, led by the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, Nita Lowey, come to Kibera when I was working in Kenya at that time. This is a year and a half ago, and spend 2 hours with me in a slum. And I can't tell you how impactful that has been in follow-up efforts. And there is currently on the Hill a number of members who were in that congressional delegation who are taking very seriously this issue and are trying to translate that into an authorization. They're being sophisticated about this because they're working with appropriators, not just authorizers. And I think that could, with the appropriate support from the Obama administration, incoming Obama administration, could lead to a level of opening that didn't exist before. I could go on all these issues, Blair, but I'd just like to say that 3 provocations. 1, the Governing Council of UN Habitat is taking place on the 30th of March to the 3rd of April. It is an intergovernmental meeting and fairly stale by comparison to the World Urban Forum. However, the composition of the U.S. delegation is something that I would just like to signal to Jerry in his presence and in this group here to diversify that group. I know it's early. The team is just getting set up with the new administration. It may be hard to get everybody on board, but I would like to suggest that composition is as diverse as possible. It reflects this wide cross-section of actors in the urban sector. Number 2, the World Habitat Day celebrations. I would like to encourage and appeal to the U.S. government to be the host of the global celebrations of the World Habitat Day, which take place in October each year. The U.S. has never hosted the global celebrations. They've hosted national events, but they've never hosted the global celebrations, and that constitutes an award of best practices that are given on World Habitat Day, and it involves participation of about 30 member states worldwide. And it could potentially be an opportunity to jettison this within the administration and Congress to give it more visibility, because it would warrant high-level participation, because it's global, not the domestic celebration. Third, I would like to consider, with this group here and others, ways to think about a series of events between now and Brazil, so that it's not the meeting itself, it's as much what leads up to it. So that we think creatively how to keep this issue alive, how to widen the network, how to deepen the networks, how to get more people involved, both domestic and international, to, in a sense, use the event in Brazil in 2010 as a target, as a benchmark, as something to work towards, both to tell the story of the previous WUFs, but also to gear up and prepare for World Urban Forum in Brazil. With those provocations, Blair, thank you.
Thank you. I know Jerry has to leave, but let me just see if you want to add anything before we open it up to the floor.
I don't want to take time away from the growing number of participants in this event, which is very encouraging. Just to say thank you to Judith and Jessica and Chris for giving a very good flavor of the content of some of the events at the World Urban Forum, and for Chris's thought-provoking comments, which are in the spirit of, as I said earlier, of giving us some grist for the mill as the new team comes on board. And at the State Department, we depend on the other agencies in the U.S. government, like Housing and Urban Development, USAID, in this case, that have had historically subject matter expertise and responsibility for domestic programs relating to the international field, and therefore we also are watching carefully what's going on at HUD as we look to how we'll work with UN Habitat in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to begin the discussion. I know a number of people probably face challenges on transportation in Washington, D.C.'s urban infrastructure this morning. And if you came in late, Chris is kindly going to make available a draft UN Habitat report on Nanjing. We will post it on our website, but if you would like to receive it by email, just let Allison Garland or Lauren Hertzer know, and we'll get you an email copy. I want to begin by, I think, picking up on one of the major themes of all the speakers, which is sort of the absence of the U.S. in Nanjing. And I think many of us have commented that there are lots of old friends in the room, which is very nice. But I think, as Jessica said, that's part of the problem. So I'm trying to think about how to pose the question. Let me put it this way. I'm the mayor of a medium-sized U.S. city. And I learned that all the groups represented in this room in Washington, D.C. pool their resources and have come up with a series of travel grants. So I and my staff can go to Rio de Janeiro. I'm trying to think of what happens when I or the head of my planning department or the head of my housing department comes back from Rio de Janeiro and is met at the airplane by a journalist, by a film crew, or has to go before a city council hearing and said, gee, what happened in Rio? Rio seems like a really nice place, but why does that matter to us? And all the talk in the world about the majority of the world's population being urban and the number of slum dwellers growing, that doesn't relate to the processes that the local officials we would all like to see involved and engaged in this process face on a daily basis. So what happened in Nanjing, or what could happen in Rio, that would be an answer for that mayor when he is called before the city council or has to go on a local talk show and says, gee, Rio de Janeiro, we hear Rio's very nice. What was in it for us, the people who elected you? What is in it at a forum like the one we just had or the one that we will have for the constituents of the people we want to see involved from the American side? How would you answer that question if you were that mayor? Any takers?
I'll try, if you like. I think that on one level, one argues, I do, the interconnectedness. It's sort of an abstract argument and maybe doesn't way you framing the question as a politician. I think that it is, maybe there is a perception that the focus is solely on the really challenged growing cities in the developing world, which it isn't, and it doesn't need to be. I think that there are a lot of really good examples that, particularly in this time when carbon footprint is increasingly an issue and so forth, where there can be very practical lessons that can be learned from the experience in other countries around the world. I mean, the U.S. has things to share, so there is that part, but it's also, if I were that politician, I would maybe, if I had some lessons, I'd want to do that. But it would also be things that I could bring home to my constituents.
I think would be the primary point. Here in the U.S., we have hardly solved all the urban problems. We have urban poverty. We have bad traffic. We have limited infrastructure resources. We hardly have perfect cities. We have mayors and city managers that struggle with development issues all the time. And I think one of the things we learned through the CityLinks program that USAID has sponsored for years with ICMA is that both parties get something out of it. They're learning too. And a U.S. city can go and learn about adaptability or learn about, busway transit systems or learn about how they deal with low-income housing or other challenges from other cities, whether it's in the developing world or other developed countries. We certainly had plenty of countries that were represented at WOOF that were from, Europe and elsewhere and, Australia and so forth. It's not the World Urban Forum for poor countries. It's the World Urban Forum. And so I think they would have any number of things that they could come back and say very specifically what we get out of it, what's the specific challenge we're working on in our city, and how we learned something in order to tackle that problem. And I think maybe that's one of the things we need to look at is how kind of we tap into that and be able to demonstrate that it's not just a one-sided or one-direction flow of information and lessons learned.
Yeah, I think, first of all, just to comment on the level of participation from the United States, I think the most significant factor was the fact that the event occurred on Election Day in the most hotly contested, the highest voter participation presidential election in most of our memories. And most mayors, or any mayor worth his salt or her salt, is involved in the what's going on Election Day and immediately preceding. And therefore, I think we have to take account of that, and future choices of dates might take that into account. For 2012, for example. Secondly, my observation working overseas in U.S. embassies around the world and working on programs with cities in other countries, I've observed that the U.S. cities don't seem to have much trouble sending mayors to other countries to launch or participate in, for example, city twinning programs or their own assistance programs that they might have because of the particular ethnic groups that are in their city. And I don't think it would be too hard for most mayors to make a connection between existing programs that they may have, especially the middle-sized to larger cities, and participation in Rio. And they could certainly, your average mayor could organize meetings with counterparts from countries from which large ethnic groups in his or her city come, for example, bring some people from that ethnic group along. I mean, there's lots of ways to solve the problem of what do you say to the guy at the at the airport. And I think really the biggest problem was the date, with the participation, to be honest.
Okay, good.
Just to round that off, Blair, I don't think we have to look forward. We can look backward in terms of how those issues were dealt with in the past. With the event in Barcelona, there were over 25 mayors from the U.S. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors executive director was there, the U.S. League of Cities, so it was partly a date issue, as Jerry's saying. Also, there were community organizers that are now affiliated with Slum and Shack Dwellers International from New Orleans that were participating in the meeting. So there's already a linkage at that level. And with Merrill Lynch and many other major financial institutions and private sector participants, they were also in attendance and seeing, not only imparting their experience, but also engaging in the forum for, quite frankly, their own market and business transactions.
Okay, I see we all have our media education and can handle the guy at the airport, but I still think that this is a rock that needs to be pushed up the hill a little bit. Let me open it up. We have about a half hour for questions, comments, observations right here. We'll get you a microphone. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Bob Kehew. First of all, thank you for a very nice event and very interesting presentations. A question for anyone on the panel. A couple of you mentioned just very briefly global climate change and urbanization. Would any of you care to talk a little more about how that topic was addressed at this forum, and perhaps give a couple examples of best practices or innovative approaches that caught your attention? Thank you.
I have to admit that it's been noted the networking sessions kind of were compressed in a matter of 2 of the 4 days, and were overlapping, so I didn't get a chance to attend any of the global climate change sessions.
And I'm afraid I have a similar answer, which is why there were some really interesting things that I didn't, but
maybe an audience
maybe
member
somebody
did.
in the audience did.
Maybe
Yeah.
we can get a microphone over here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jane Katz from Habitat for Humanity, and I participated in a global climate change and economic development session that was sponsored by the Global Urban Development Organization. In that session, there were representatives from the mayor from the Philippines. There was somebody from China who worked in the construction and environmental section. There's a paper that was being produced by Global Urban Development on global climate change, a project that they're working on now both in the U.S. and internationally. And there were a few other panelists who were, I was a panelist talking about Habitat's work in using environmental materials and work that we've been doing in Nepal relating to bamboo and producing economic opportunities for women there. So there were other sessions, and I did want to comment that there were so many sessions that were taking place at the same time that it was really difficult. I didn't get to many of the sessions of these panelists because we had a number of other sessions that we were sponsoring. CGAP was sponsoring a session on housing finance, so that was another area that was being sponsored. So the scheduling, again, to reiterate that there were no specific tracks that were conducting all the way through. So when Judith had her session, Slum Dwellers International was at the same time, and CGAP was also hosting a housing finance session at the same time.
Yeah, just quickly on the climate change. There is in the report, there's a section on climate change, and it really outlines a lot of the details of that. On the adaptation side, I think a lot of effort is put in post-conflict and reconstruction and disaster management and preparedness. I think there was several sessions that dealt with that. Pakistan was one of the cases. In terms of prevention, looking at energy efficiency, building materials, particularly housing building materials, as you're looking at huge housing backlogs in most of the countries you're working at. And then lastly, for both adaptation and prevention, just solid urban planning and management.
I just wanted to mention I didn't attend any of the sessions that were specifically billed as addressing climate change, but there was one session which was very interesting, which was an opportunity for private sector companies to interact with several ministers and fairly senior officials. And there was a company there that has done urban transportation projects in a number of cities, both in Europe and in the developing world. It's a Paris-based company. And they gave examples from a project they're doing in Bogota and a project they're doing, I think, in Cairo. And those were focused on the problem Jessica alluded to earlier in reducing the net carbon footprint of the urban transportation system. And there were some really very interesting ideas, not high tech necessarily, just in how you organize, bus lanes, what type of buses you use, how you transition from a relatively high emissions bus fleet to a lower emissions bus fleet, and how you finance that, which was really got a lot of interest from the government representatives. And with that, I think I'm going to excuse myself and thank everybody for participating. It's very interesting for me. And my colleague Klaus Botzet is here, and I'm sure will share with me the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Why don't we go in the back, and then we'll come up here.
John Garrity. A question for the panel. I'm to take up on what Judith Hermanson had said about the comparative neglect of urban issues in international forums, and that were the same issue was mentioned by the other speakers, Jessica and Toledo and Chris Williams. How much traction does the argument that unstable cities will destabilize nations have when you're talking to other governments? I'm thinking that when you're talking about national development strategies, the urban sector is ignored, or the urban regions, the vast urban regions of a country are ignored. You'll talk about agriculture or rural development before you'll actually deal with urban regions. So what is the likelihood of dealing with urban governance and its links to national security? Is that an argument that's in any way viable? Thank you.
From a government perspective, take a thing, and I'll have some thoughts.
Make a first quick cut, which is, I think the argument is easily made and it's there, but first and foremost, we have to see that within, if it's the U.S. government making that argument, through our embassy or U.S. aid, we first have to see that as a priority, and we haven't really succeeded in getting that attention. Other issues tend to take the forefront, and in many countries they have not yet embraced urban development, and still seems to be the prevailing attitude that if we focus on rural development, we'll keep them out in the rural areas and keep them from coming to the cities. There's an unwillingness to accept the notion that cities will continue to grow and they will attract people, whether they're miserable hellholes or they're lovely places to go. They will still be places of opportunity. And it captures some leaders' imaginations and holds some water, the argument, but I don't think we've even managed very well within the community here in the U.S. to put that at the forefront in the discussions of kind of the conflict, stability, and reconstruction discussions and arguments. Urban development and cities, it's out there on the fringe, and I think there was a CIA-sponsored study a number of years ago that folks like to refer to, but it really hasn't gained that much traction. And so I guess, again, we come back to how do we do a better job of making that argument and being able to bring that to leaders. In some countries, like Brazil, there is at the highest level an embracing of cities and urban development from a positive perspective. Does the stick work better than the carrot to say, well, gee, if you don't, you're going to have terrorists bombing your own communities and so forth. You'll have instability and internal turmoil. I think that argument's out there, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be a particularly motivating factor as of yet.
I think that I agree with what Jessica is saying. I think that in a way, maybe a backdoor awakening, if you will, is through the youth issue. And for us, just back up for a moment, for us, what I was trying to convey, and I think Jessica is saying somewhat the same thing, that when we say urban development, often people don't quite, what does that really mean? And it's not, we haven't really articulated what its components are and what the importance of current issues are within that. And it's so complex, how do you, so you tend to kind of segment. I think that the attention and the backdoor thing that I was starting to allude to concentrations of youth with non-marketable skills, of pent-up energies and so forth, is beginning to take hold. You'll find that a number of cities around the world are very concerned about gang violence and so forth, which certainly has its own kind of destabilizing aspect. And looking at it from another perspective, was one of the things that CHF has been very involved in is post-conflict, or sometimes even immediately post-conflict, work at a community level to help to bring a stability to the country itself through working at a very basic level to rebuild infrastructure, to help people to engage in their own governance, to move forward. And again, it goes to making the argument, but if that's an immediate quote-unquote solution, being very simplistic here, then why isn't that something that you look at in a beforehand situation? I think the argument is very much there to be made, and I actually welcome other people's thoughts about this, and I think it may be one of the ways that we can get a greater light shone on the urban agenda.
Yep. Just very briefly on that question. There's a book written by Lael Brainerd, the Brookings Institution, known as Too Poor for Peace. And it basically maps out the linkage between poverty and terrorism. It's a very thoughtful piece. There's a number of thoughtful pieces, many of them on youth. And it's worth reading to direct this issue. Our potential future U.S. ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, is also a contributor to that article. Her particular article is in that edited volume. I think, in addition to that, as one reference, the question more broadly, John, is not so much to harp on a national security issue. I think it's more just to get straight at the question that the sequence of events that rapid urbanization, not properly managed and handled, is leading to very, as you say, unstable cities, which is bad across the board. It's economically unhealthy. It hurts regional economies. It's creating missed opportunities for people to realize their productive capacity. I think that's the general argument. To just quickly jump to this is a security threat, it can be done, but I think the wider issue is to couch it in terms of poverty reduction strategies.
Okay, we have a question right here, and then we'll go over there. So we'll come here next.
Chia Chen, freelance correspondent. I enjoy you three speech. I would like ask you three a question. What does sustainable development mean to you? And could you mention 3 or 5 basic elements in it? Thank you.
Any, Chris?
Sure. The way UN Habitat frames this issue is not dissimilar from the way many city governments that we're working with frame it. It has 4 elements. The first is land and land tenure security. The second is environmentally sustainable water and sanitation delivery systems. The third is innovative finance mechanisms. And the fourth is effective city management. There are hundreds of other elements, but we've been selecting these 4 because we feel that they help drive the issue and give clarification to what is meant by sustainable urbanization.
What I might add to that, and maybe that comes under that rubric of effective city management, is the full engagement of the citizens, because it is their quote unquote ownership of whatever the solutions are. And I guess I should also say, which is totally off your subject in a way, but sustainable is such a buzzword that we, at CHF anyway, use long-lasting, because what does sustainable in the end mean?
Okay, there was a question over here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Devin Brookins, and I'm from Urban Institute. I appreciated all of your presentations, and in particular, Judith mentioned some of the new challenges facing the urban agenda that we need to think about moving forward. And I thought maybe that I might add one and see what your opinion or perspectives about it would be. And that is the kind of jockeying or positioning of cities in terms of trying to gain global status and attract global investment, and the kind of conflict of interest there in terms of trying to position themselves for economic development and growth opportunities, but at the same time having very difficult responsibilities towards their own populations in terms of infrastructure and inclusivity for the urban poor. So how do cities balance that? And maybe if you have any perspectives on how to move forward with that question. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very important issue. I think every city government struggles with this in the United States, worldwide. Ideally, the situation is that, as Judith is suggesting, the city is participating in a sense, a social contract with the private sector, community organizations, various interest groups within the city, so that there is a balance between attracting foreign capital, and particularly foreign direct investment, and making sure that cities are inclusive and balanced. I think in general the path of least resistance for the last 15 years before this economic meltdown has been towards beautification of cities, which has caused massive gentrification and displacement. Cambodia is an extreme where slum dwellers were just picked up out of Phnom Penh and put in the periphery in order to make way for an industrial park. So I mean that's an extreme case, but you don't have to go to I mean, the history of urban development in this country is littered with these examples, and it's not so much that there's I guess my response to your question is not so much that there's a panacea here, but that the ingredients for effective participation in city planning processes among different actors is in place, so that social contract can be arrived at.
Just a brief thing, and I think you're quite right in getting the balance right. Insofar as investment is something that can create opportunities for poor people to be employed and to generally benefit the economic climate, that can be a good. It's the question of how it's managed and the types of investment, I think.
Let me just follow up and ask, and I'm not looking for best practices, but just to give tangible form to this, are there any cities any of the panelists feel are emblematic of success in finding a balance, at least even if it's temporary, between development and inclusion? Are there any places you would sort of point to as, gee, this is what we might want to think about?
Well, no. I would actually just point to, and and maybe this is ill-considered, but we're doing some work in India right now under the Gates Foundation funding that I mentioned earlier. It's sort of a learning agenda to try to figure out the answers to some of these problems. And one city that was actually also the focus of our exhibition at WOOF 4 is in Nagpur. We've managed to engage with communities as well as the local government, and helping to link that with national government resources. And it seems to me it's still very much a work in progress, but that's a city that is growing. Its urban issues are growing, and yet it's still, I mean, it's not Mumbai, it's not places where this has gone on for, and it seems to me that maybe it's not emblematic in terms of what you're asking for, but to work with cities of that size and when they are kind of on the upward trajectory is probably a very good thing.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the strategies that USAID has taken in recent years, at least in a few countries, is looking actually at promoting competition and seeing that as a positive thing, at least within a country. I mean, not at the global level of attracting global investment, but in Indonesia, we've been doing this in Vietnam and in some other places, looking at how you push cities to compete against each other within the domestic environment, and looking at that comprehensively. So it's a matter of investing in infrastructure for the city as a whole. It's having legal and regulatory frameworks that are conducive to local businesses. It's investing in social goods, education, health, and so forth, and that a certain level of healthy competition can be a good thing and a motivator. And so I guess one of the things we need to look at is how to build and support, I think, some of the smaller, medium-sized towns, and which is where most of the growth is happening, and where a lot of investment really needs to be domestic. For many countries, where the wealth is what's there. It's in the informal sector. It's in the small businesses and medium enterprises, and really focusing less on the few countries that are or cities that are in fact competing on a global scale, but the vast majority of cities, which are really the secondary cities and smaller cities and market towns, which are growing, internally and based on a domestic market, and how competition can be a healthy thing, so long as it is in the context of a recognition of the need for a comprehensive approach to local economic development that's really benefiting the community as a whole.
Okay. I think what will probably be the last question is over here, unless you so provoke everybody that we need to have a follow-up. Right over here.
My name is David Grossman. I'm with ICMA. ICMA had a large presence in Nanjing at the World Urban Forum. But before we break, it's not a question. I just wanted to insert a note of optimism with respect to the insularity issue. I think there are several organizations in this room, such as ICMA, such as Habitat for Humanity, that have extensive networks, not only in this country, but around the world, and can mobilize those networks to support WOOF 5 in the upcoming 2 years, and can collaborate together in fora such as the International Housing Coalition, where we meet regularly and discuss these topics. And an example was on World Habitat Day, ICMA collaborated with Habitat for Humanity to disseminate and promulgate a lot of their toolkits and information regarding World Habitat Day, not only in 5,000 cities across the United States, but to our 22 international affiliated organizations. So I think we're way bigger than what you see in this room today, and we should recognize that and take advantage of that, and develop a strategy to use those resources. Looking forward to WOOF 5.
Well, on a note of optimism, I think I will bring the formal session to a close. Let me just see if any panelist has any final thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, especially for coming out on a rather nasty day. Thank you.